My brain has been full of so many thoughts since finishing the 2 Hunger Games prequels. I can't stop thinking about them. I've been consuming so many videos on Hunger Games lore and political theory, and I'm going to link some of my favorite ones in the description, the ones that have captivated me. And I need to vent my own thoughts. I just have a little list of bullet points here. This isn't fully scripted or anything like that, so it might be a little bit rambly. If you're new here, if you're from the Hunger Games side of the internet and not the ASMR side of the internet, which is most of my audience, hello, my name is Sleepy. I make ASMR. And this is my second channel where I just kind of put random stuff. I'm really just throwing pasta on the wall and seeing what sticks. For me, for the audience. So if you're new here and you enjoy this, then please let me know in the comments, because I don't have anything else like it. So if no one tells me that they like it, I'm not going to do any more of it. So point number 1 about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is that both Lucy and Coriolanus are songbirds and both of them are snakes. And I think a very strong argument could be made that Lucy is more the snake and Coriolanus is more the songbird. At first, I really wanted to say that as like my radical hot take, that Lucy's the snake and Cory is the songbird. But I felt like I couldn't fully defend it, so I'm just going for the medium. They are both, and if you've read these books, you know that Suzanne Collins is really, really big on symbolism, so I don't think it is at all accidental. Any connections that you make between the motifs of the books and the characters. The most obvious thing, of course, that makes Lucy Gray a songbird is that she is a charming singer, she is a revolutionary and a little bit of a rebel. But what makes her a snake is her duplicity. She does not say what she thinks at almost any point in this book. And I think there's something very interesting that Suzanne Collins says throughout all of the Hunger Games books about how sometimes good people in her books, the protagonists, do things that are very wrong in a vacuum, and that sometimes bad people do things that are good in a vacuum, and that brings me to Coriolanus. Coriolanus is the most honest protagonist in all of the books. Also, I didn't really like this book. I almost never like villain books. I have a lot to say about it, and it was very well written, but I didn't enjoy it near as much as any of the other ones, and I feel like I just have to get that off my chest. But Coriolanus, he is more honest than Katniss, more honest than Haymitch, and definitely more honest than Lucy Gray. And on top of being honest, he also takes people at their word. So when Lucy Gray lies to him, he believes her. And when Sejanus is acting, fairly rebellious throughout the entire book, Coriolanus doesn't take it seriously until he has real evidence that Sejanus's sympathies are with the districts rather than the capital. Until he has concrete evidence, he is on Sejanus's side, and that does kind of support the idea that he is a very principled character. He takes people at their word, and he is very honest himself. And that is a trait that a lot of people don't like to admit, that a lot of kind of lowercase c sociopaths and lowercase n narcissists have. And when I say capital or lowercase, I just mean that I'm not talking about the clinical definitions of these words. I'm kind of just talking about the psych pop representations of these kinds of personality profiles. But narcissists and sociopaths oftentimes weaponize truth. I think the cheap representations of them are as just like liars and cheats, but the really good narcissistic or sociopathic villains, in my opinion, are ones that pervert the truth, weaponize the truth, etc. And Coriolanus is an excellent representation of that. I think another kind of fair representation of that's very different because it's not, a political representation of that, is someone like Joe in You. He perverts the truth in his head, you know. He doesn't think that he's like lying or being bad, but the truth for him is obviously very different from what it is for other people. All that to say, Coriolanus weaponizes truth, and the way that he does that is the way that the Mockingjay does it, or really the Jabberjay does it. He takes people's words and he uses it against them, and I haven't seen any other people talk about that whenever they're talking about this book. I'm not on TikTok. I have a feeling that like Book Talk maybe has talked about this, because my intuition is that Book Talk talks about everything. But one of the most pivotal moments in this story was when Coriolanus used the Jabberjay to record what Sejanus was saying and incriminate him with it. In that moment, he was the Jabberjay. He was the songbird. He was not the snake. He was the songbird because he was using someone's words against them to tell the truth about who that person was. I think another kind of symbol that you could create using the motif of the songbird is that Coriolanus is the Jabberjay, where Lucy Gray is the mockingbird. And that kind of goes along with what I was saying before, in that the Jabberjay repeats word for word exactly what someone says, whereas the Mockingjay transforms it a little bit into song. And in that way, the mockingbird is a little bit more free and a little bit more duplicitous, perhaps, by nature, in the same way that Lucy Gray is. Lucy Gray honestly perceives the world and interacts with it, but her expression of that like genuine goodness is through a kind of lie and she has to manipulate the people around her in order to be free herself and in her own way, whereas Coriolanus is a product of the capital in the same way that the Jabberjay is, and he is brutally honest with himself, the world, and he assumes honesty from other people, takes people at their word. Very Jabberjay-ish, very mechanical in that way. That took much longer to say than I expected it to. But the next kind of thought that I had about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, that's funny, is that Lucy Gray's song, "Nothing You Can Take From Me Was Ever Worth Keeping," and that song ties into Sunrise on the Reaping quite a bit. So this segment, I guess, kind of refers to both books. But the song is wrong. I don't know what else to say. The song is wrong, and I think the books prove that time and time and time and time again. Nothing You Can Take From Me Was Ever Worth Keeping. Let's see if I can find the actual lyrics to the song in here. You can't take my past, you can't take my history. You could take my paw, but his name's a mystery. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. You can't take my charm, you can't take my humor. You can't take my wealth, 'cause it's just a rumor. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. Thinking you're so fine, thinking you can have mine, thinking you're in control, thinking you'll change me, maybe rearrange me. Think again if that's your goal, 'cause you can't take my sass, you can't take my talking. You can kiss my ass and then keep on walking. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. No, sir, nothing you can take from me is worth dirt. Take it 'cause I'd give it free, it won't hurt. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. I think this song is worth analyzing for every character, and I'm not going to do that in this video, but I do want to talk about Hamish Abernathy, Lucy Gray, and Coriolanus Snow, kind of the central characters of both of these prequels. So for Lucy Gray, obviously the main singer of this song, You Can't Take My Past, You Can't Take My History, the Capitol did do that. The Covey is a nomadic group of musicians that have basically had their past and history stripped away from them because they are forced to live in District 12 even though they're nomads. And throughout the course of the books, from the first one all the way to the last one, the Covey completely lose touch with their past. They don't remember who they were by the time Katniss is coming around. Not really, at least. You can't take my charm, you can't take my humor, you can't take my wealth, because it's just a rumor. So I would say that there's a sense in which Coriolanus did take away Lucy Gray's charm and humor through his own hatred of her. He took away all that was good of her. He didn't take it really from her. He took it from himself, if that makes sense. But as it was attached to her at the beginning of the story, for Coriolanus, she had a lot of charm, and she had a lot of humor, and she had a lot of value, which is wealth, right? But as the story progresses, he took those things away from her by trying to control her charm and humor. He stripped it away from her. Thinking you're so fine, thinking you can have mine, thinking you're in control, thinking you'll change me, maybe rearrange me, think again if that's your goal. Obviously that can be applied from Lucy Gray to Coriolanus. You can't take my sass, you can't take my talking, you can kiss my ass and then keep on walking. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. So those are like very bold lines, and in a way Lucy Gray did like win the situation of this book because she got away and was never found. But we have to take into account that Lucy Gray loved her family, and she loved District 12 in a way, even if she didn't feel like she was a part of it. She loved performing for them, and she loved being a part of Pan Am, and she loved that her family used to be a traveling band of musicians for Pan Am, and the Capitol took that from her. Coriolanus took that from her, and now, presumably, she lives a life in secret, in the forest, singing for no one, and performing for no one. A lot of people like to think that she made it to District 13, right? And if she did make it to District 13, I don't think a lot of people talk about how much she would have hated it, because District 13 is like a totalitarian gray regime where there is no singing and there is no dancing and there is only work. There's no drinking, none of the things that Lucy Gray loves, none of her culture. The Capitol stripped her of her past, of her history, stripped her of her culture, and those things are definitely worth keeping. Those things are definitely worth keeping. No, sir, nothing you can take from me is worth the dirt. Take it because I'd give it free. It won't hurt. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping. And she doesn't give it for free. She gives it for a pretty high cost, I would say. She doesn't give it easily. She wants to trust Coriolanus. I believe that Lucy did have some affection for Coriolanus, but that her affections faltered throughout the book, and she realized that she couldn't trust him, and that he was, at the end of the day, a bad person. And giving him up was a cost to her. Giving up the idea that he could be reformed into someone good was a cost to her. Her family was a cost to her. Coriolanus didn't go on to directly kill all the Covey in the same way that he definitely directly killed all of Haymitch's family. But he did strip her of her family by forcing her out of her family and into the wilderness by herself. So the song is wrong for Lucy Gray. Now let's talk about Coriolanus. Again, this is something that people, I don't think, talk enough about. Coriolanus's relationship to the Capitol and the things that the Capitol took from him. You can't take my past, you can't take my history, you could take my paw, but his name's a mystery. So Coriolanus does have a father whose name is not a mystery, but whose kind of personhood is a mystery for Corey, and most of the book he's constantly kind of thinking about his father and referencing his father, but he doesn't know his father as well as someone like Tigris, who is a little bit older than him, who has more memories. And that kind of ties back into, you can't take my past, you can't take my history. Coriolanus's relationship with his family is really dominating a lot of his life, because his history, his family name has been ground into the dirt. His wealth is a rumor, to reference that other line, you can't take my wealth because it's just a rumor. Coriolanus has nothing to lose because his wealth is just a rumor at the start of this book. That is literally a plot point. He comes from a great family, everyone thinks that his family has money, but they are in fact dead poor, and they have nothing. You can't take my charm, you can't take my humor. So Coriolanus is undeniably charming and humorous in this book. He is a teenage boy who has a lot of ambition along with a zest for life, and he genuinely likes people like Sejanus and loves people like Lucy Gray. Even if his love is an unhealthy form of love, he does have the energy in him and the zest for life to have something very much like love for Lucy. And by the end of this book, the Capitol has stripped that away from him. You could also argue that instead of it being taken from him, he gave it to the Capitol, which perhaps points to the last stanza of this song. Nothing you can take from me is worth dirt. Take it, 'cause I'd give it free. It won't hurt. Coriolanus doesn't value the goodness in him, and so he gives it away, and that was probably the most worthy thing for him to keep. Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping is a devaluation of all of the good that someone does have that is worth keeping. Coriolanus had so much good in him, enough good to be a very conflicted protagonist who had some hope for becoming a hero and not a villain, but he didn't believe that that potential was worth keeping. So he gave it away, or it was taken from him by his environment. And then, of course, there is Hamish Abernathy in Sunrise on the Reaping. And Maisie, I'm pretty sure it's Maisie, reminds him at more than one point in the book that nothing they can take from you was ever worth keeping. That the Capitol can't take the most precious things away from you, Hamish. Maisie is such a great character. I feel like everyone completely falls in love with her in this book. And President Snow takes everything from Hamish. They definitely take his sass. They definitely take his humor. They kill his whole family. They take his health by kind of putting him in the perfect environment to become an alcoholic. They take his wealth in the sense that victors of the Hunger Games should live lives of relative comfort, but the Capitol makes it basically impossible for victors like Hamish to enjoy that comfort, and in that way, their wealth is just a rumor. The districts look at the wealth of the victors and think that they're living an easy life, when in reality all of the victors are completely broken and manipulated, when the presentation of the victors is just propaganda, and it's not even truthful to who the victors actually are and the sorrow that they must all feel for being a survivor of the games. Every victor, I think, in all of the games has survivor's guilt, and the Capitol would never really let that be at the forefront of them. They just become mannequins. And their humanity was definitely worth keeping. Even the victors that maintain their humanity in their hearts, maybe victors like Mags, right? Even victors like Mags, they don't maintain their humanity on a mass scale. People still see them as symbols of something rather than people. And the symbol is not something that the victor gets to choose. It's something that the Capitol chooses. The Capitol tells whatever narrative it wants about people. So yeah, my conclusion is that the Nothing You Can Take From Me Was Ever Worth Keeping song is just like absolute cope. And I think it's a cool addition to the story. It kind of shows how we cope, I guess, with lies. But yeah, I think it's a completely false song. The Capitol takes everything, and every single thing is worth keeping. The enjoyment of your wealth is worth keeping. Valuing your goodness is worth keeping. Your sass, your humor, these things are worth keeping. Your past, your history, your connection to your land and your family and your songs and your culture. These things are all things that the Capitol strips away from people, or that Coriolanus himself strips away from people, and they're all worth keeping. So that sucks. There's a lot of unofficial theories going around about how Katniss is related to Lucy Gray, and there's a rumor that I keep seeing that Suzanne Collins has confirmed that Lucy Gray is Katniss's grandmother. And as far as I've been able to find, Suzanne Collins did not confirm that anywhere. The only place that it can be traced back to is a Reddit comment that says Suzanne Collins said that, but nowhere is the actual source of Collins saying that. And I haven't even been able to find the Reddit comment. I've just heard people reference the Reddit comment. So if any of y'all know if Collins has officially said anything on this matter, let me know, especially if you have a source. But as far as I know, there's been no confirmation that Katniss is directly related to Lucy Gray, but there does seem to be a lot of indications that Katniss is somehow distantly related to the Covey group through her dad, Burdock. And I actually kind of strongly dislike this. And this is a product of the prequels. It was not really at all implied with just the original trilogy. And people get really into this theory, and I think the fact that people get into it so much, like, makes me angry, because it feels like it misunderstands the point of the story. Because if Katniss is Lucy Gray's granddaughter, then that really reduces the story from one about the will of the people permeating a culture and coming to fruition in a kind of natural rebellion that was always brewing within people from the Capitol all the way through all of the districts into District 12, that there was this will of rebellion and fighting for the good that was permeating through everyone until it came out in Katniss, who was just a normal girl. It changes that story from a story about, like, a genetically rebellious family that's better than all the other families, or like more, their rebellion is somehow more potent, or it's just a story about one family getting their karmic revenge against Coriolanus, some ex-boyfriend of one of the people in the family, which is a much worse story. It's just a much worse story, and I don't like it. Now, the other theory is that Katniss must be... This one I really hate. When people say that Katniss must be Covey because she sings well, I think that's the most ridiculous thing in the world. Like, have you ever grown up in a town? You know how like singing, a lot of people sing, a lot of people can sing a lullaby or two, and Katniss is not like a great performer. She knows a couple lullabies because she heard them in District 12, and that's like not a very special thing. And Burdock as well, having a really good singing voice, Katniss's dad, does not mean he is Covey. If we look at everyone in these books who can sing and says, oh, they're secretly Covey, or even worse, if those rumors get confirmed in some way and it turns out that everyone who can sing is secretly Covey, I would just cringe so hard at that. It's embarrassing. Please let that not be the case. Now, separate from that, there are some indications that Burdock's mom was Covey, and I can't even really remember why, but there are reasons in the book which would make Katniss not really directly related to Lucy Gray, but kind of connected to the Covey a little bit, and I'm okay with that, because that just kind of seems like small town shenanigans, and District 12 is, doesn't have a crazy large population from what I understand. They're all in the Seam, which is an area of District 12. It makes sense that there would be a little bit mixy in there. But yeah, the idea that she's like directly related to Lucy Gray, it honestly pisses me off. It ruins the entire series. If she's directly related to Lucy Gray, I'm angry. Time has passed. I went to the gym and I edited a video and I spent too long scrolling on YouTube Shorts, and I put on my slug shirt. My happy slug shirt, and I am back to continue rambling about the Hunger Games. I don't know exactly how to succinctly define this point I want to make, because it kind of is about why The Mockingjay is my least favorite Hunger Games book, although perhaps the most important, and also about the common theme that other people attach to the books, that we are the capital. And people say that with a lot of gravity, as if it means something, as if it is some kind of message. I've never liked it whenever people say that a major theme of the Hunger Games is that we are the capital, because I don't think that's a statement that goes anywhere. It's kind of a nonsense statement. The message is implied in this statement, which is always like a shitty theme. I think if you're trying to define a theme of a book, then it should just like be a message, not kind of vaguely imply a message. And the message that's vaguely implied is like, we are the capital is bad, and therefore we are bad for enjoying the Hunger Games books. And I think that also just misses the point of the books, because in the books, the capital is actually, first of all, not bad when it comes to the people. A lot of the people are bad, but most of them are well-meaning inhabitants of a broken system and a brutal system, and that also applies to the districts 1 through 12. All of these people inhabit a brutal, broken, and bad system, and they're treated unfairly within that system. I think it's really important to remember that the people in this world do not enjoy the Hunger Games. It excites them in a way. Everyone does watch it, and everyone is very invested in the stories of the Hunger Games, but especially when the games were first being founded, like in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, people didn't like the Hunger Games. They were brutal and violent, and they really just made everyone sad. And there were a lot of people, presumably, like Jessup, who were in the capital, but from the districts, and the Civil War had put them into this situation where they didn't internally have a true allegiance to either the capital or the districts, viewing them as antagonizing forces. In this book, one of the conflicts that Coriolanus Snow has to overcome is that the citizenry of the capital and the districts do not want to watch the Hunger Games because they're too sad. And no one likes them. Even people in power, like Casca Highbottom, they don't like the Hunger Games. Obviously, no one in the outer districts likes the Hunger Games. They see it as feeding their children into a slaughter, and they watch because they are afraid, and they watch because they're worried. And the people in the closer districts, the career districts 1, 2, and 4, we are told that they like the games, but we have not had a career POV book. The victors that we met from 1, 2, and 4, like Finnick, certainly didn't enjoy the games. And especially after being crowned victor, they received kind of the same torture as anyone in the outer districts. So I do not think that we should just accept that the inhabitants of the career districts enjoyed the games. Katniss and Haymitch think they do. That's all that we know. The only way that the capital's citizens can bear to enjoy the games is when they begin to be alienated from the fact of children killing each other, and it just becomes a game of odds. I would argue that some of the worst and most villainous people in this book are the gamblers in District 12 from Wyatt's family, who, without even really the prompting of Coriolanus Snow turning the games into like a betting scheme, they just did that on their own. They were already just seeing the tributes, the children, as objects to bet on and make money on. They did that by themselves. The capital did not turn those people into monsters. And most of the citizens all throughout Panem are disgusted by the brutality of the games as soon as they get past that alienation. And I don't think that's at all unusual or even bad. The Hunger Games is not the only book about children being violent. You know, there's Lord of the Flies. Harry Potter is pretty violent if you actually take it at face value and you imagine all of the abuses that are happening between professors and students at the school. Percy Jackson is super brutal. The Warrior Cats series, which I have lining the shelves behind me, is marketed towards kids. They're considered kids' books, not even middle grade books, and there are characters that get, you know, half of their face torn off. There are these big battles. There are little babies that die. We read brutal books all the time that are marketed towards children. That's not even getting into adult fantasies, which are oftentimes covering full-scale wars. Enjoying the excitement of fictional brutality and ruthlessness and underdog stories is not a bad thing. So to say that we are like the capital, it's just not a critique, I don't think. It's just like true, but there's no grand or interesting message there. I think the message or the theme should be amended to say, who in the capital do we want to be? Because that is a much more interesting and actionable question. I think it is true that if we were to see Panem as a sort of analog for real life, then if we are of the class of people that are mostly reading these books, which is to say we live in a first world country and we have kind of the basic necessities of life taken care of for us, we are the capital, or we are at least within districts 1 through 4. No matter how kind of backwater or country you identify, I say this as someone who grew up in like South Louisiana, There are, in fact, children starving in Africa. I know that's like a cringe thing to say, and I know Africa's huge, but there are children in the world who are working from the age of 9 and dying in diamond mines. This slug shirt that makes me so happy is like upcycled, which ooh, it was upcycled. That's probably good. It was repurposed. But the fabric that it's on, I mean, I have no idea where it's from, but it was probably put together in some Venezuelan factory where women are paid whatever the equivalent of like $2 an hour is, That is the world that we live in America and most first world countries. So if we are to view Pan Am as an analog to real life, yes, we are definitely of the very, very privileged classes here, but that does not automatically turn us into villains. My favorite sleeper character in these books is Plutarch. I think a lot of people who really read and understand these books latch on to either Effie or Plutarch as beautifully written characters that we are supposed to identify with, almost more than Katniss or Peeta. Obviously, if you just totally have a Peeta vibe, then identify with Peeta, but I'm trying to talk about who in the story we have the potential to affect the world in a similar way that they do. And for a lot of people, I think those characters are Effie, Plutarch, and maybe Cinna. How do we as the privileged class try to fight for good in the world, try to represent good in the world, and try to rebel in whatever capacity we can those forces that are evil? And that doesn't mean turning our back on our fellow capital citizens. It means rebelling against the proper enemies. In this book, that is Coriolanus Snow, and in this world, that is a very unfortunately complicated question that I certainly can't answer for everyone. But there are many capital citizens in these books who identify evil correctly and who fight for the good. And so yes, the message is that we are the capital, but the message is not we are the capital and therefore bad for enjoying the Hunger Games. The message is we are the capital and therefore we have a responsibility to be good, and it has nothing to do with whether or not we enjoy the books. They're books. We're supposed to enjoy them. If we didn't enjoy them, Suzanne Collins would not write them. Enjoying the books is fine. The world is made up of processes, and we are all inside processes. And it is up to us to either empower that process or fight against the process. There's no rest. So Plutarch is someone who is constantly fighting against the process of the capital at kind of different levels of force, I would say, throughout the series, but he's fighting against it in the capacity that he can, that keeps him alive. And Plutarch's not a pleasant, nice character. I mean, nice is maybe not quite the right word, but he makes a lot of people angry for good reason. He's never enough of a rebel that he feels comfy. But he is one of the most important cogs in the machine of the revolution because he keeps going. And that's something to admire. And then I think Effie is relatable for a lot of people because she's someone who doesn't really realize how bad the capital is. She is not at all really a rebel, but then her heart starts to break when she has to send Katniss and Peeta back into the arena. after they've fallen in love, after they're supposed to have won, and she changes and she starts understanding the districts. And even within the books, I don't think Effie is really supposed to represent someone special like Plutarch. I think Effie represents most of the capital citizens who start wailing and crying in those interviews in Catching Fire. They don't want the games to happen anymore because they know it's bad, and they are fighting back against the system in that moment. And it might be shallow. They're, crying while watching these Hunger Games interviews. It might not be as grand as what Gale does when he bombs children, but what they do is important. What they do is important because in their own capacity, they are fighting against evil. And I just don't think that should be scoffed at. Yes, we are the capital. And the capital is not bad. Snow is bad. And the system that they're in is poisoned. The system that they're in turns the capital into necessary villains. That's almost the whole point of Mockingjay. That is Katniss's great internal struggle and critique of District 13, is that District 13 just hates the capital, and that's wrong. That's wrong. The capital is full of good people. And so too is our society. We are worthy of being protected. We are worthy of being lauded for the small efforts that we make for the good. We also have a responsibility to take positive action whenever we become aware of our ability to do it and how to do it safely. And yet, the reason that I don't enjoy reading The Mockingjay, and I only read it once, and it was when it came out, so I mean, my memories of it aren't perfect, but I have no plans on rereading it because it's too sad. And the reason that it's so sad to me is because it is a reminder that there really is no winning or losing. All there is knowing that you fought for good, or knowing that you fought for evil. President Snow did not lose. And Katniss didn't really win. But Coriolanus Snow knows. He knows because he is honest with himself, and because he is honest with the world around him. He knows he represented evil in Panem. And Katniss and Peeta, they know they fought for good, tooth and nail, all the way to the end. But no one really wins in the sense that good prevails and all is well in the world. There was a regime change, and President Coin definitely needed to go, and she did go, which is good. The worst future was avoided whenever Katniss made her last kill. But that doesn't mean that the new Panem will be perfect for everyone forever, and we all know that. The Mockingjay for me is much less about a great revolution leading to a better world, and it's much more about people with trauma finding peace in a deeply imperfect world. And the previous books feel more fantastical to me because they're about the potential for a revolution that can save the world. And I like living in that fantasy where if enough good people rise up, good can become a state that the world stays in, at least for some significant amount of time. But the Mockingjay is realistic, and that's why it hurts. That's why it hurts to read. That's why it's also important, though, I think. Power will always corrupt eventually, and unfortunately, we need people in power. Whenever we have a society, whenever we have a state, we need people in power. And that power will create darkness, and that darkness will be something that we always have to fight against. We always have to represent good, even though the only reward we get for it is knowing that we were good. Yeah, and that's just sad. It is inspiring in its own way to know that a truly good and just society can't be achieved, because it kind of liberates us from the responsibility of saving the world, and it instead encourages us to save our conscience, or save our soul if you want to use religious language. It encourages us to be sinners and Plutarchs for the sake of the people who we can help, for the sake of being a force for good rather than a force for evil, and just knowing that we stood for good and that we gave good to the people around us instead of evil. And that is what victory is. It's like doing your fucking best. You know what I mean? I want to finish this by very briefly talking about what I want to see next, because I think, myself and a lot of people are expecting there to be at least one more prequel, because we had the original trilogy, and I think the prequels are like kind of going to be a trilogy, sort of. They're separated, but it makes sense. It just feels like there should be another one. I've seen a lot of people say that they want a prequel from Peeta's perspective, or Finnick's perspective is a big one, or even people like Effie or Plutarch, but honestly, I feel like their stories have been told. Their place in the story of the rebellion has been told, and it would be fun to read their perspectives, but I don't think there'd be much substance there as far as philosophy or political theory, which is really what Suzanne Collins likes to write about, and she likes to add to that discussion as she fleshes out this world. So what I would like to see next is a story from a capital person or from someone in one of the career districts, and I want it to be someone who loves the capital. Even in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I said it again, Jesus, snakes. Snow despises kind of all of his friends, and he doesn't really love the capital, he just loves power. So I want to see the perspective of someone who is truly a victim of the capital propaganda. Maybe someone like Effie who isn't Effie, or someone from one of the career districts, because I really, really want to see if they do actually kind of enjoy the games and volunteer because they want to. I think that's a kind of gaping hole in the story. What is going on with the careers? Because I do not believe they would enjoy going into a death game. I don't think anyone would enjoy that. I mean, I think individuals might enjoy that, but like entire regions of a country, I don't believe it. I just don't believe it. I feel like it's propaganda. So I really want to see something from their perspective, and I want to see how they contribute to rebellion or to propaganda, the propaganda of Panem, how they contribute to Panem in general, what their place is like in the society that Collins has built, because it's super interesting. So yeah, I just want to see someone who's on the in, you know? Not someone who's on the outskirts. I would also like to see perhaps I think we all are curious about like the dark days, going back even farther in the history than the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes goes. I want to see what District 13 was like before, because I know they started the rebellion, the first rebellion. I can't really remember right now. I know they started the rebellion that eventually ended with the Capitol's victory and the installment of the Hunger Games, so I think a District 13 prequel from way, way, way back then could be super interesting. There's some people who want to see Coin's backstory. I really hope it's not Coin. If it's Coin, I'm gonna read it, but like, I really hope it's not Coin. That would be even worse than Snow. It would be rough. It'd be rough. One last note, and then I'm gonna end this ridiculously long ramble. I feel like I've been talking myself in circles. I totally subscribe to the theory that the Capitol is Mormon. Not Mormon in the sense that they're like actively practicing Mormonism, but Mormon in the sense that the Capitol is in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that the powerful families are direct descendants of powerful Mormon families, and that affects the culture kind of in downstream ways. And in defense of Mormons, I don't want any Mormons watching this video to take that as like, if the Mormons ruled the world, I think the Hunger Games would happen. That's not at all what I'm saying. Obviously these books are shit shows, and any religion can be projected into the future, into a fantastical setting where their descendants become evil, maniacal overlords, okay? We can imagine that with pretty much any kind of framework or paradigm, but there's a lot of geographical reasons why Salt Lake City makes sense for it to be the capital. Katniss is talking about the wide streets that she sees, and there's all these other interesting things, and this theory, as far as I know, was created by another YouTuber, and I'm gonna link that below. It's probably my favorite Hunger Games deep dive video I've ever listened to. It was just so much fun to listen to. And if you want to hear all about why the capital is Salt Lake City, Utah, many years in the future, then I highly recommend you watch it. Again, I'm also going to link my other favorite Hunger Games deep dives, because I've just been in a phase. I think I finally said it all. I feel satisfied. Good night. I hope you're asleep or something.